Imagine this. You're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. No engine. No mast. No radio. Just a 10-foot wooden dinghy, an inflatable life raft that keeps sagging. 4 children, 2 adults, and nothing but water to every horizon. For 38 days, that's your world. You drink tiny drops of water made by a cheap plastic gadget you almost didn't bring. You eat raw fish and turtle. You watch ships pass in the distance that never see you. And the worst part, when your boat went down, no one on Earth even knew you were out there. This is the true story of the Robertson family and the drifter who accidentally joined them when whales tore open their yacht in 1972. Most stories like this end quickly. This one didn't. If you want more real survival stories like this, hit subscribe. Now let's go back to where it all began. A family that sailed away from normal life. Late 1960s, Staffordshire, England. Dougal Robertson was a man who didn't fit the life he'd built. He'd been a merchant navy officer. Now he was stuck on a failing dairy farm. He hated the rigid school system his kids were trapped in. His marriage to his wife, Lynn, was under pressure. The future felt small. So he did something drastic. He sold the farm. He bought a 43-foot wooden schooner named Lucette. And he announced he was taking his family around the world. Lynn agreed. It was a massive risk but also a way out. The crew. Their teenage son, Douglas. Their 9-year-old twin boys, Neil and Sandy. Later, their older daughter Anne would join for part of the journey. And in the Caribbean, one more person climbed on board. A young Scottish hitchhiker and would-be sailor named Robin Williams, no relation to the actor. He just wanted a ride and some experience. He had no idea he'd end up fighting for his life with them. In 1971, they left Falmouth, England. Lucette wasn't a luxury yacht. She was old school, oak frame, wooden planks, simple gear. Dougal trusted his own seamanship more than electronics. The family learned fast reefing sails, standing night watches, cooking in a rolling galley. They crossed the Atlantic to the Caribbean. They passed through the Panama Canal. They entered the Pacific. By June 1972, they were several hundred miles west of the Galapagos, headed toward the Marquesas. The weather was fair, trade winds pushed steadily. By day, the kids did schoolwork. At night, they read and played games below deck. The crazy dream seemed to be working. None of them knew their most dangerous moment at sea wouldn't be a storm. It would be whales. The day the whales came. June 15, 1972, mid-afternoon. Calm seas, steady wind, just another day until the hull shuddered. Not a wave, not a normal bump. A deep, solid impact. Then a second blow, harder. Wood cracked with a sickening sound. Lucette lurched. Dougal and Douglas rushed to check. On deck they saw the cause. A pod of killer whales, orcas, surfacing right by the hull. One had rammed them amidships, another strike followed. To this day people argue whether it was an attack, confusion, or some kind of freak accident. For the 6 people aboard, the reason didn't matter. What mattered was this. The hull was ripped open below the waterline, and the Pacific was coming in. They ran below. What they saw is every sailor's nightmare. A jagged hole in the side of the boat. Water flooding in like from a fire hose. The pump couldn't keep up. Within a minute, carpets were floating. Within 2, the water was up to their chests. They weren't in trouble. They were sinking. There was no time for patches, no time for debate. Abandon ship. Lynn grabbed whatever she could from the galley, a few tins, some onions, a bag of limes. The others threw the 10-foot wooden dinghy overboard, then the 9-foot inflatable life raft. It's easy to talk calmly about life raft drills in a safe marina. It's another thing when your home is going under, whales are surfacing nearby, and your 9-year-olds are screaming. They launched the dinghy first, then the life raft, tied together with a line. Supplies flew through the air. A small bag of tools, a spear gun, water containers, a few cans, whatever hands could grab in seconds. One of the twins, Neil, slipped and fell into the sea. They hauled him back half drowned and terrified. Minutes later, Lucette was going down by the stern. Her mast tilted, then slid beneath the surface. The boat that had been their world for over a year was gone. In its place floated two tiny things. A 10-foot wooden dinghy. A flimsy inflatable raft that was already starting to sag. 6 people. No radio distress call sent. No emergency beacon. No one expecting them for weeks. They were now just specks on the Central Pacific. Most stories like this end right here. The Robertson's story was just getting started. 2 tiny boats, 1 fragile camp. On paper, the inflatable Liferaft. Aft was their main survival platform. In reality, it began failing almost immediately. The floor sagged. Air seeped from the chambers. The seams weren't holding. The wooden dinghy was the opposite. Small but solid, mahogany planks built to handle rough water. Dougal made a critical decision. They would treat the dinghy as the real boat, and the raft as an outrigger and extra flotation. They tied the two together into a rough catamaran, their floating camp. When they counted what they actually had, it was grim. About 40 liters of fresh water. A few tins of food. A small stash of onions and limes. A handful of candies and some dry biscuit. 1 spear gun, some fishing line and hooks. A small plastic solar still someone had shoved into their gear in Panama, almost as an afterthought. Basic tools, a knife, pliers, a bucket. And 6 people. If they ate and drank normally, they'd be dead in a week. Dougal slipped straight back into officer mode. From the first day, he imposed strict rationing. Tiny, measured mouthfuls of water. Minimal food. He knew they couldn't survive by stretching tins. They'd have to learn to live off the ocean. They were in the trade wind belt. That meant there should be fish. There should be squalls with rain. If they could figure out how to use both, they might have a chance. Learning to eat the ocean. Step 1, catch food. Robin, the Scottish hitchhiker, had done some spearfishing before. With the spear gun, they started taking shots at any fish that came close enough. At first, they were clumsy. They fired too early, too late. Fish darted away with nothing but a scratch. Then they started hitting. They dragged in mahi-mahi, flying fish and smaller species. Every fish was more than just a meal. Flesh for calories. Eyes and head fluids for a bit of water. Liver for essential vitamins. Then they learned the brutal but life-saving skill many castaways discover, catching sea turtles. Their little floating camp, and the scraps they tossed overboard, attracted turtles resting or feeding near the surface. When one came close, they grabbed its flippers and wrestled it aboard. A turtle can break bones with its flippers and rip flesh with its beak. Every catch was a dangerous fight. But one turtle meant days of meat and fat for 6 starving people. Lynn became the camp butcher and cook. With a knife and whatever surfaces she could improvise, she carefully processed every animal. Meat to eat immediately and to dry in the sun. Fat for cooking and later as crude lamp fuel. Organs for concentrated nutrition. Occasionally a little blood, used carefully to supplement fluids. The kids didn't get a different, kid-friendly menu. They ate what everyone ate. Raw or barely cooked fish. Strips of turtle. Now and then, a sliver of onion or lime to fight scurvy. As days passed and fuel for cooking ran out, more and more of their food was eaten raw. It carried a risk of parasites and infection. The alternative was to slowly starve. They chose the risk. Catching the sky. Food they were slowly figuring out. Water was a different kind of terror. Those 40 liters were measured out like medicine. The children begged for more. Their lips cracked. Their urine turned dark. They learned quickly that thirst isn't dramatic. It's slow, grinding, and merciless. Their unexpected lifeline was that small plastic solar still. A sailor in Panama had handed it to them almost as a joke. Now it might be the thing that saved their lives. They let it float beside the boat, tied off with a line. Salt water went in. The sun heated it. Pure water evaporated, condensed, and dripped into a small reservoir. It produced only a cup or two a day, but it produced it every day. And it didn't depend on luck. On top of that, any time a dark line of cloud appeared on the horizon, their entire routine shifted into one mission: catch the rain. They stretched the raft's fabric into a makeshift funnel. They used plastic sheets and even clothing to guide water into containers. For those few minutes, everyone from Lynn to the twins became a water collector. Sometimes the rain came. Sometimes it didn't. During dry stretches, they lived on rationed sips, plus the fluid they could get from fish and rarely turtle blood. The adults quietly cut their own share to give a little more to the children. From whales to sharks. The whales that destroyed Lucette vanished after that first violent encounter. Something else moved into their place. Sharks. The trail of fish scraps, guts, and blood drew them in. Dark shapes began circling under and around their tiny catamaran. Once, as they were hauling in a turtle, a large shark lunged up and tore into it, the ocean literally trying to rip food out of their hands. The rule became simple. No one falls into the water. The twins were told to sit low and always hold onto a rope. No exceptions. The sharks were a constant, circling threat. But the thing wearing them down fastest was quieter. The slow draining of their strength and sanity. Holding it together. There's a simple pattern in long survival stories. Your body fails slowly. Your mind can fail fast. Dougal was naturally authoritarian and stubborn. On land, that could cause fights. On a tiny boat, it kept things from collapsing. He set clear rules. Who stood watch when? Exactly how rations were divided. Where each person sat to keep the dinghy trimmed and stable. There was no democracy about food and water. Lynn provided the other half of what they needed. Come. She comforted the kids when they woke up from nightmares. She told stories. She insisted on little routines: cleaning up, combing hair, sorting gear, to remind them they were still people, not just survivors on a raft. The twins invented games with bits of rope and scraps. Sometimes their energy almost got them into trouble, and they had to be pulled back. Robin, the outsider, became a kind of social buffer. He was someone to talk to who wasn't father, mother, or sibling. They talked about home. About what they'd eat first back on land. Cold drinks, bread, hot showers. They also fought. They had dark moments. At times, each of them came close to giving up internally. One night, they saw a ship close enough to hear the engine. They tried to signal. They watched desperately. The ship never changed course. It passed into the dark and disappeared. The next morning, they checked the lines again and went back to the ration schedule. Routine became a survival tool. Drifting on memory and current. When Lucette sank, she took their main navigation tools with her. No sextant. No charts. No compass. What they did have was Dougal's memory. Years at sea had given him a mental picture of the Pacific. He knew the trade winds and currents generally pushed east to west where they were. If they let the ocean carry them, eventually they should reach something, an island chain or shipping lanes. He made a simple sea anchor to keep the bow facing into the waves and reduce the risk of capsizing, while the current dragged them along. He made one more key call. They wouldn't exhaust themselves rowing for nowhere. A tiny dinghy against the Pacific isn't really going anywhere under human power. Better to save strength and trust the slow, invisible pull of current and wind. Day to day, the horizon looked exactly the same. Week to week, they were drifting hundreds of miles. When the raft finally died, the life raft that had expanded their space and caught so much rain was slowly falling apart. One chamber went flat and stayed that way. Others began to leak. The fabric sagged, tore, and twisted. Eventually, they had to face it. The raft was no longer a safety device. It was a liability. They cut it loose. Now everything, people, gear, water, had to fit into a 10-foot dinghy. 6 people packed into 3 meters of wood. They rigged a small canvas sheet to create a bit of shade. Every shift of weight had to be careful and deliberate. One wrong move could swamp them. Salt crusted on their skin. Blisters formed and burst. The sun burned them day after day. But the dinghy did one crucial thing the raft could not. It stayed solid. It did not deflate in the middle of the night. Day 38 seen at last. By the 5th week, their bodies were nearly done. They were thin and weak. The twins slept more, spoke less. Lynn's hands were raw from salt and work. Dougal's temper flared easily over small things. But they were all still alive. On the 38th morning, they woke to another gray-blue day. They checked the fishing lines. They talked about whether they dared eat an onion that had started to rot. Then someone spotted a speck on the horizon. At first, it was almost painful to look at. Was it anything, a cloud, a trick of light? Slowly, the speck became a shape. A ship. This time, the angle of approach and the sound of the engine told a different story. The Japanese fishing vessel, Tokamaru II, wasn't passing by. It was coming toward them. At first, the fishermen thought they were looking at debris. Then they saw it move. As they drew closer, the picture sharpened. A tiny open dinghy. 4 children and 2 adults crammed inside. All of them burned dark by the sun, clothes in tatters but moving, alert. Alive. The crew threw lines and pulled them aboard carefully. They handed them food and water, then took it away, then gave it back in small amounts. They understood something many people don't. After weeks of starvation, eating or drinking too much too fast can kill you. Then they hauled the dinghy onto the deck as well. That little 10-foot boat had become more than wood and nails. It was evidence of what 6 people could do with almost nothing. In a moment, I'll break down why this family survived when so many don't. But first, what happened after they left the ocean? After the ocean, the Robertsons were taken to Costa Rica, treated in hospital, and debriefed by officials and reporters. News headlines went around the world. Family survives 38 days on dinghy after whale sinks yacht. Back in Britain, Dougal wrote Survive the Savage Sea. The book became a classic, not just because of what happened, but because of how honestly he wrote about it. The fear, the arguments, the mistakes, the moments when he nearly gave up. Lynn later wrote her own account, focusing on practical survival and what it meant to be a mother trying to keep 4 children alive at sea. The kids grew up and moved on, carrying both scars and a deep knowledge of what their family had survived together. Robin Williams, the hitchhiker who had just wanted a ride across part of the world, went back to life ashore, forever tied to one of the most remarkable survival stories of the 20th century. Why did they survive when so many don't? A lot of people in similar situations die within days. The Robertsons survived for 38. Here's why. They had a few key tools and used them well. A solid wooden dinghy, a failing but initially useful raft, a spear gun, a small solar still. None of it was high-tech, but they squeezed everything they could out of it. They rationed from day one. They didn't wait until half the food and water were gone. Strict rules started immediately. They learned fast to live off the sea. Fishing, catching turtles, using meat, fat, organs, and even fluids. Nothing was wasted. They built and kept a routine. Watches, chores, little rituals. This gave structure to days that otherwise would blur into hopelessness. They respected the ocean instead of fighting it blindly. They used their knowledge of currents and winds, and let the Pacific carry them into more likely rescue zones instead of burning themselves out rowing. They functioned as a unit, not as 6 separate panicking people. They argued, but they made decisions together and shared the work. There's one more lesson. Children aren't always a burden in emergencies. When you give them real roles, they can be shockingly strong. Neil and Sandy were 9 years old. They bilayed water. They watched for fish and turtles. They ate whatever kept them alive, without special treatment. For 38 mornings, they woke up on a boat smaller than a kitchen table, surrounded by nothing but ocean. Every single dawn, they faced the same choice. Collapse, or fight through one more day. They chose to fight. This story is drawn from Dougal Robertson's Survive the Savage Sea, Lynn Robertson's later writings, and contemporary reports of the sinking of Lucette and the rescue by the Toka Maru II. If this story made you rethink what a family can endure and how fast an ordinary day can turn into a battle for life, please like the video. It really helps. And for more true survival stories like this, hit subscribe. There are many more journeys like this waiting to be told.